the last presentation of the day before the keynote speech. Vytautas Germanavicius. Vytautas is a Lithuanian composer, graduated from the Lithuanian Academy of Music. He studied with Julius Juzeliūnas. He also studied at Mills College, USA, and has studied with Professor Jonathan Harvey and Alvin Curran. Germanavicius was a recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship for Electronic Music and Recording Media Studies at Mills College, USA. He's also been the recipient of a number of awards and prizes, including a prize from the Zentrum für Kunst und Medientechnologie at the International Competition for Electroacoustic Music, Shortcuts. And he was also composer in residence at the Visby International Center for Composers in Sweden. Germanavicius was president of the Lithuanian section of the ISCM from 1998 to 2005. And his music has been heard both in Lithuania and abroad by many different ensembles in many different countries, including Mexico, the Netherlands, Sweden, Poland, Ukraine, China, Latvia, Denmark, many places. His works are distinguished by unrestricted stylistic range, balance between intuition and new compositional techniques, and a particular attention to the sound color and search for new performing possibilities. So welcome, Vytautas, and you have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you for nice presentation, and thank you for invitation to this conference. Very interesting. I would like now to share my computer. Yeah. Do you see my screen or
not?
no?
It's not filling the whole screen at the moment. It's just in one corner. So I think you need to pin it. You just unpinned it, I think.
Okay. I'm working the first time. I did a Zoom before. Yeah. I just.
If you could try stop presenting and then try again, and it. Okay.
Okay.
There it is.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Do you see something?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
I can start. Yeah. So my presentation falls on like two parts: the research project and implementation of the results based on my research to the composition. So my recent study is based on Lithuanian folk songs to determine interval distances in the scale and to use the results of my recent composition for two violins. The main source for this research was archival sound recordings from a period between 1930s to 1940s, which could preserve the ancient tunings, unequal pitch distances, microtonality in vocal and instrumental tradition, and possibly change and redefine the structure of the scale in comparison with 12 equal temperament. A little bit history. Since the 19th century, in the works of Lithuanian, Prussian, and other scholars, the area of intervallic relations, especially the distances between tones in Lithuanian folk melodies, was not considered very important. However, a German educationist music theorist Friedrich August Gotthold, who studied the folk tradition of the Baltic region, remarked about the Lithuanian melodies published in Reza's collection in 1825, quote, that some tones could have been chromatically altered and the melody softened or modified, end of quote. Many transcriptions of Lithuanian melodies were made in the turn of the 20th century, during which time musicologists and researchers relied on the notational system on a 12-tone chromatic scale and tunings on the church organs. In the interwar period of the 20th century, the famous Lithuanian microtone composer Jeronimas Kačinskas wrote in his article, Prague, the city of creative musical initiatives, quote, according to some famous musicians of Prague, Orientalism is closer to Lithuanians than the Western European spirit. It is noticeable in the character, the rhythm and melody of Lithuanian folk music. If we take a look at our ancient instruments, panpipes, small horns, trumpets, etc., we will find here the intervals smaller than semitones. It can be assumed that the Lithuanians in ancient times did not know the Greek and German major and minor keys. Here will be the most likely influence of later centuries. End of quote. Lithuanian music theorists in the 40s, Jadvyga Čiurlionytė and later Četkauskaitė, noted the need to notate smaller intervals than semitones in Lithuanian folk melodies, and recommended using these symbols, by arrows up and down for notes smaller than a semitone, by a cross for indefinite pitches, and by a wavy line for glissando to the first step in the scale. The other direction besides the scale analysis in the 12-tone chromatic system refers to the intervallic peculiarities related to the natural harmonic series, the natural simplicity of the frequency ratios between notes. The musicologist Vytautas who stated, quote, the intervals of a perfect fifth and perfect fourth are very important for the construction of a scale. These intervals of the reference tones form the framework for entire scale in Lithuanian folk music. In the book On the Way of Sutartinės and Skudučiai, the vocal and instrumental music researcher Stasys Paliulis mentions the Lithuanian traditional woodwind instrument daudytė, which produces the first 5 overtones of the natural harmonic series. In the example above, we can see 5 overtones produced by 2 daudytės tuned in G and A, respectively. Below, you can see a polyphonic sutartinė, melody played in 2 tunings, G and F. From a fundamental tone G, it produces 4th, 5th, and 6th overtones of the harmonic series, and from F, only 2, the 5th and the 6th overtones. To begin my study of Lithuanian folk songs and their instrumental version, I needed first to determine the distances between the intervals in a scale, and secondly, to compare the collected results with 2 temperate systems, natural harmonic series and 12-tone equal temperament. About 100 examples of sutartinės and monodies and their instrumental versions were taken to determine each distances in the scale. One of the example, the clear audible microtone, the monody Fly, Fly, Little Falcon, recorded in 1937, we can listen to this song a little.
I fear the sound isn't going to come through from your PowerPoint.
Okay. Yeah, the sound is pretty bit very old, and it was recorded using another technology. And yeah, so in this recording, which I analyzed at the Sibelius Academy of Music in Helsinki during my doctoral internship, composer Juhani Norvala proposed his microtonal instrument tonal plexus to identify tones by ear. In this melody, we identified the second degree, with a deviation of about 30 cents compared to 12th tet. It was a bit surprising to notice that the deviation corresponds to the Rast microtone in Magamat Arabic scale. To measure the distances of the notes in the scale, I used the computer software Melodyne 5. Yeah, which can detect sound deviation even in polyphonic music audio samples. Here I present a table of overtone series in an octave for comparison with chromatic 12th scale. The microtonal overtones are highlighted in yellow. In identifying the intervals in the scale, I have set a distance limit for detecting microtones of 20 to 80 cents and up to 10-15 cents for overtones compared to the natural harmonic series. Quote, however, choir singers do not hear tone deviations if it does not exceed more than 5 cents singing in unison. The mismatch in 10-15 cents is often felt but still tolerated. This is also a standard deviation for solo performers from Ternstrom and Sundberg, Intonation Precision of Choir Singers, Journal of Acoustic Society of America. Using Melodyne, I made the analysis of polyphonic instrumental song Sutartinė. On the next slide, you can see the collected data. The scale of a song, scale degrees, detected interval distances from the reference tone, and interval ratio. I have calculated interval deviations compared to the 12th, tone distances and deviation in the scale, and made an identification of microtones and harmonics. The numbers in yellow with asterisk indicate 2 microtonal degrees in the scale, and below, numbers in bold with a serial number indicate 2 microtonal overtones. In the scale are indicated in blue, number 13 and number 29. The sonic code of each song was abstracted orally from a scale generated by Melodyne and adopted as original tones of a melody. The sonic code and its sequence of tones do not represent a tonic, as the tones are arranged from the lowest to the highest with a small interval distances in between, to have a clear sonic structure. In this case, from C to the lowest F+, in the order in which each horn begins to play. 1 degree of a scale was taken into brackets as an unsung tone, depending on the algorithm of the computer program that is created to detect the scale of each song. Now we can listen.
Sorry, we can't hear coming through the presentation that the way you're presenting it. The sound isn't coming through.
Oh.
Is there a way of playing it through your speaker so your microphone picks it up? So it comes out of your speaker and goes back in through the microphone.
And in that case, you can hear now.
No.
Okay. Okay, I will continue without the, okay. In this table, you can see the number of overtones with the serial numbers that were detected and calculated when analyzing the vocal and instrumental music samples. I identified the most common 9 overtones, and additionally 5 microtonal overtones numbers 29, 13, 21, 25, 11 in vocal music. For instrumental music, we identified 3 microtonal overtones number 29, 21, and 13. And for all samples commonly used, microtonal overtones are 29, 21, and 13. In this table, I have calculated the summary data of the overtones. You can see the vocal music songs have 6 exactly produced overtones to compare with the natural harmonic series, and for instrumental music, it is 2. It could be assumed that the number of overtones with exact pitch or slight deviation are common in vocal and instrumental music. Thus, the performers of the Lithuanian folk music tradition partially reproduced the tuning and interval relations of the natural harmonic series. On the other hand, the constant use of microtones in Lithuanian vocal monodies was clearly spotted. In Lithuanian vocal and instrumental music samples, there are many ornamented transitional microtones that the program identifies, but does not identify as the main tones or recurring sounds, but rather summarizes the common intervallic distances of a song. In many cases, you can find the same pair of degrees in the scale, temperate and microtonal. For example, 2 second degrees or 2 6, 2 third, 2 fourth, or 2 7 degrees in the scale. To compare the interval distances between the tones in the scale, I have divided all songs into 3, 4, 5, or 7 chord structures according to the number of tones from 3 to 7 in the scales. I selected 3 main intervallic distances detected in the ensemble of horns, tunable musical instruments, based on which all examples were compared. After comparing all the vocal and instrumental music, the scales were divided into 2 groups. The first group has 6 subgroups, the first subgroup corresponding to the first interval distance of horn ensembles, which is very common in sutartines and monodies. The second group is stable. It corresponds to the second and third interval distances of horn ensembles and is widely used in all vocal and instrumental music samples. In this table, you can see identical interval distances of all collected music samples according to the number of tones in the scale. Yellow color indicates sutartines, pink monodies, green horn ensembles, blue panpipes, and red kanklis. The dominant interval distances in Lithuanian folk melodies corresponds to the pentachordic structures of the horn ensembles. The interval distance code of the second group is recognized in 22 sutartines, monodies, horn, and panpipes ensembles. And the distance code of the first group, A subgroup, is recognized in the 16 sutartines, monodies, and horn ensembles. In the other subgroup, the number of samples is lower, or 3, 4, and 6. From the results of the interval distances in the scale, the general interval distance for all vocal and instrumental music can be determined. It is a formula of the second group, 3 quarter tones plus tone, and the formula of the first group, 3 quarter tones, tone plus semitone. In this research, but different angle, I identified the recurring or popular tones used in performance of the songs. In sutartines examples, the popular or recurring tones are C, F sharp, then second degree microtones and second degree temper tones. And then the intervals are the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th. In monodies, the popular or recurring tones are C, F, and B flat, and in all songs are C, F sharp, F, B flat. So from these examples, we can derive a formula for recurring tones. It will be C, F, and F sharp, which correspond to the intervals 4th, tritone, and 5th. To identify the distance between the tones in the scale, I have chosen an amplitude of 25 to 75 cents for microtonal deviation. The formation of a scale for the new piece begins with the analysis of polyphonic song sutartine, 2 green little birches, and the identification of the intervallic distances in the scale. In this table, we see 3 microtonal degrees detected by the computer software Melodian, the 2nd, the 4th, and the 7th, of which 2 pitches assigned to the 4th and the 7th correspond to the 2 microtonal overtones, number 23 and number 29. These distinct deviation of tone in the scale of sutartine are characterized by microtonal alterations. The other tones in the scale correspond to a 12th tet. Following the analysis of the sutartine song, a quarter tone and the 6th tone alterations are added in this fragment. In this slide, you will see 2 versions of sutartine scales, authentic with micro alterations and converted in 12 equal temperament. Tones in parentheses are unsung pitches detected by the program. Below is a sonic code of a sutartine. For comparison with a modified sutartine interval structure implemented in multiple episodes in a piece. The difference of these scales is 1 tone B, the 6th tone down instead of up of the original version, and F sharp quarter tone was eliminated from the scale. So to build a new scale for the piece, I chose sutartine's 5-tone equal tempered scale to combine with 5 microtonal overtones for a natural harmonic series, and with the 2 microtones B and C from sutartine authentic scale. Red directions demonstrate sutartine's modified structure. Now here is a scale of 19 tones, with additional tones added. Red line, modified intervallic structure of sutartine. Brown line, sutartine scale in 12th tet. Blue line, 5 microtonal overtones. Yellow line, additional tones in 12th tet. And a black marked additional microtone of 3rd degree, common in Lithuanian folk tunes. The structure of a piece is based on the projection of a harmonic chord, D, A, D, A, C sharp, E, which extends the central tone D from the beginning of a piece. The projection of a harmonic chord forms the central tones along with the other tones into interval structures. The work begins with a timbre coloring technique on the sound D in the first violin, while the second violin follows the progression from the notes B, D sharp, tremolo to the noted of the lower octave where two violins meet in unison. Then the first violin begins to show the projection of a harmonic chord. The modified interval structure of a sottotine is incorporated at several points in the piece as part of a 19-tone scale. Yeah. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Vytautas. And we hand over to Paul.
Yeah, well, thank you. That was a very interesting discussion about the origins of the scales and how you put them together to create your own scale. It's very interesting how in the folk music, the different instruments, they all had their own sort of ways of tuning or different scalar patterns. I'm curious, do you know if like the vocal music was somehow influenced by what the horns could do? You know, if the instruments naturally would produce a certain type of interval, would that influence what the singers would eventually sing? And is there any kind of feedback between the different genres of folk music?
I think it was, but there is a kind of arguing who was the first, the vocal or instrumental. Especially, I mentioned the Lithuanian folk instrument auditas, which no more exist, but it was in the beginning of the 20th century. People still played with that instrument, which produces overtones. But my presentation was I showed the horns, the 5 horns ensembles. We have still these instruments. And who was the first? Nobody knows. One researcher, actually, ethnomusicologist, he wrote that the first instruments, the men play instruments, and the women, they repeat what they play. So this is polyphonic music, polyphonic sottotines. So he said that first was instrumental music and afterwards vocal. But there is no evidence, actually, who was the first.
Yeah. Well, in a way, it would make sense to say that people were singing before they had instruments, but once there were instruments, then they could have actually influenced back on what was sung. So it could have been sort of a cyclic sort of feedback. It's hard to say. Yeah. I noticed at one point you mentioned your program would pick up on some ornamentation. There is microtonal ornamentation.
Yes.
And the program, I don't remember now, did the program say that it did not include those notes, or did it did include those notes? I can't remember now which way that went.
Actually, the program, you can see those notes on the screen, but the notes are not calculated like main notes, because we have different tableau, and you can see the scale, but these notes are not included in the scale. So the program detects the scale for each song, but you can pick up some notes from a screen and see how it's moving, the melody, and find the points, the main points, related to the scale, and points are not related to the scale.
the reason I'm asking this question is because it seems to me that there is, in different types of folk music, or not even necessarily folk music, in some Chinese music and things too, or even like in American blues, there's a lot of inflection on notes. And when does the inflection count as part of a scale, and when does it not? And that's the question that sort of came up into my mind as I heard that the program was sort of wrestling with this issue as well.
Yeah, the program pick up the sounds which are recurring sounds many times, and those sounds who are not, you can only see them pick up these sounds, but they are not into the system of a scale. But the other thing that Melodyne every time wants to detect the scale. Even I have only 4 sounds of singing, but the program detects like 7 sounds, 6 sounds, because it wants to create a scale for each melody. Mm-hmm. So what I've done, I've been using, I just detecting the sound by ear, or with piano, or as I said, with tonal plexus we did, because you detect by ear everything. And then you can decide yourself which sounds, the sound deviation of each sound. I mean,
well, that's actually yeah. the point of my question to begin with is, I mean, to not necessarily question the use of the program or what the program was thinking, but in terms of what you're thinking is then, or what people generally in thinking about this folk music, would they generally accept those pitches as part of a scale, or would they accept those pitches as inflections on the scale? Is there a standard way about thinking, a standard way of thinking about those pitches?
Yeah, because you know, when people singing, you can get different. Every time you get, when they repeat the same song, because they repeat the same song, so you can get a different performance, kind of different scale, a little bit. Sometimes you can get temperate, or sometimes they want not to sing a temperate sound. So, but the program, because I did several times, I take the same song and did analysis with a program, kind of 5 couplets, as we say, 5 times repetition of the same song, and I did first, second, and I see the difference.
Oh, the exact same song, so, and there was a difference.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's the same song. Yeah. So the program pick up like a recurring sounds. So when you see these differences, you can pick up yourself what you hear, because if you get a different performance from a different ensemble, because they can perform differently, of course.
Yeah, well, I think that's
but
part of the fascinating.
Not far away, of course.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's part of the very interesting thing. It's almost the inflection is part of the expression. And I'm curious then, when you make a scale using all those inflected notes, do you sort of you compose using that scale? And if so, do you use some of those notes as inflections, or do you use them as a straight scale, like they're dead on pitch? There's no variety in what that pitch can be. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. I did in my several pieces, kind of based on this research, but I picked up firstly only the sounds of Sutartinės, or of Sutartinės basically. But in this piece for violin, I implemented kind of a scale of 4 sounds of Sutartine. But it was not kind of intention to have the rhythm and melody of Sutartine as a quotation, but to implement only the pitches, I mean, into, but to have close pitches and to hear the relations between them, to hear these different sounds.
The microtones.
Together.
Yeah.
There is a microtones and temperate, yes. But to hear a difference, kind of to have a Sutartine from a long period, because from a longer time ago we were singing like that, because now we sing in temperate way. Because the thing, because I mentioned 19th century, the 19th century hearing was different from 20th century. So people, especially after the Second World War, they sing the same Sutartines in 12th temperament. So it's equal temperament. And before we sing a little bit differently. So the tuning, it's coming maybe from natural harmonics here. But people, they're not educated, so it was kind of, they receive information from elderly people. So it's coming from, I don't know.
It was truly a tradition. It was just passed on from generation to generation. It's a shame that we couldn't hear the recordings. I wonder if there's any way that you could figure out how to, if you can put it into a tab on the Chrome browser.
I have
if
this.
It's
sorry. You can see this tab now?
Yeah.
Not yet. Oh, okay, it's coming through.
Yeah.
No, I'm not hearing it though.
Sorry?
I'm not hearing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you presenting it? If you're presenting it as a window, it won't have the sound. It has to be presented as a tab.
This is,
when you select present, you have to select the lowest option, the bottom option of the 3.
Full screen, yeah?
Stop presenting and then start again. Yeah, stop presenting and then press it again, and then you have 3 options. And you need to choose the bottom option, which is sharing a single tab.
Which one?
And then it should give you a list of all the tabs you have open, and you select the tab with the audio on it.
I can't get this. Wait.
Oh, yeah, you might be using a different browser. You have to use Chrome.
Oh, okay. I'm using Safari.
Yeah.
Oh, you have to use Chrome.
Oh, I have to use Chrome.
Open it in Chrome, and then you'll be able to do it. think Vytautas is trying to open it in Chrome, so we'll give him a couple of seconds. And I see that the Lithuanian composer Andrus Maslekovas has shared a link in the chat relating to sutartines. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
This particular discussion is scheduled to continue to 4:40, so we still have a few minutes.
Well, I guess I could sort of fill in some time by basically saying I think it's really interesting thing how sort of equal temperament took over the world for a while, and people are sort of like letting various cultural aspects come through and influence that, and opening up the possibilities more in recent years. I think it's
that's interesting. Yeah, interesting. The idea that people's hearing actually changed, the way people conceived of scales and pitches and melodies and intervals.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and even
I suppose influenced by. Yeah.
Somebody has a question?
Go on. Jorgis.
Yeah, just about this, I just made this thought. It might be wrong, and I cannot back it up with ethnomusicological data, but sometimes I get this feeling that the West is shifting away from well-tempered scales in terms of compositional strategies, whereas you see more, let's say, traditional societies, more the East, Greece, for example, and so on, that adapted and feels still a very strong connection with the well-tempered scales. It's kind of like one gave to the other something and they just keep utilizing it for different reasons and different purposes. That's all. It's a hunch.
In what way do you say the West is moving away from equal temperament?
And the East did the opposite.
I think this is a really interesting thought, because I think it might create some interesting effects. I mean, the sort of contrast between the two. I think from somebody who grew up with equal temperament, you know, when you hear something that's not equal temperament, you notice it. And I assume it should be the same way. If you grew up not in equal temperament, when you hear equal temperament, it would be different. So the sort of hybridizing, the sort of mixture of the two, or more than two different concepts, actually many different concepts, could create many different interesting possibilities. The only
don't you think it's because of instrument construction? I suppose as techniques to build instruments more precisely improved, then it became possible to make instruments which could play a perfectly equally tempered scale.
I think the big culprit is the keyboard. It's because you had to have a keyboard that could play in all these different keys. And you know, it goes back to well-tempered clavier. It's the idea of making a keyboard that you wouldn't have to retune to play well in different keys. And instruments and violinists or singers, they always put a slight inflection on the tuning to make it sound just right, and a keyboard can't do that. And I think other instruments maybe have sort of, my guess is that maybe other instruments have sort of tried to mimic the well-tempered aspect. But in truth, if you have an ensemble of strings, and if they're playing the most beautiful sounds, they probably are not exactly well-tempered. They're probably, or whole, equal tempered. They're manipulating the tone a little bit to make it just sweet, to make the right intervals sound just as sweet as they can.
I see that Bohdan has something to say, and I also see that Vytautas has come back. So Bohdan, would you like to speak first?
Well, yeah, thanks. I'd like to give my 5 cents here and talk a little bit more about what you just said previously. I think instrument construction definitely is a major aspect that we should take into account, because if an instrument doesn't allow you to play in a quarter tone, or if it makes you play the tempered scale the way we think of it today, then it's preconditioning it a little bit. Now, what I'm thinking also through this is 2 aspects. One is that we all seem to think that the piano is tuned in equal temperament, but that's not the case. So if we look at the higher and lower pitches, we know that there are many various ways in which you need to put out of tune those ranges in order to get proper resonance. And usually they're tuned according to the perfect octaves in order to produce more resonance in terms of our harmonics. And the other thought that I had is, how close are we getting to those quarter tones and all of those microtones when we are trying to read them from a score with a modern Western instrument that's already defined, definitely built to produce the music and the equal temperament? We're just approaching it, I think, and sometimes perhaps it's very difficult to get exactly that system. Maybe we need to build new instruments. Maybe that's the actual solution for this type of music.
Vytautas, have you solved the technical problem? Can we hear the music? Your microphone is turned off.
Sorry. Yeah. If we speak about tunings, I think it's important issue. And 19th century tuning was a mean tone, Ptolemaic mean tone temperament. And after the pianos came to the, it was an industry of the pianos, and they make this equally temperate system to the world. But we even know that the English church organ saved the mean tone temperament still at the end of the 19th century. And I think it's the main reason is tuning. And after 20th century, equal temperate kind of came to the power, I say. So we know the Vishnegradsky and Haba, they started to cut the string, I would say. So it's different approach. If we tune the instrument according to the natural harmonic series, or you tune, like you measure the distance. And it's not related to the natural sound of nature. So that's the difference. And all music was sounded, all the composers were thinking, we hear different sounds in the music. All classical composers and romantic composers. So, yeah.
Can we hear some of the soutatinas? Is there, do you have is there? Have you managed to open Chrome and? Or maybe this is something that I can you can send to me and I can share it on the website afterwards.
Yeah, maybe yeah. I will send examples.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm aware of time. Is there anyone that really is really desperate to ask a question, another question? Okay. So thanks again to Vytautas and Bohdan, and thank you also to Paul St. Gregory for moderating this session.